Hi, this is Logan, Dr. Tom's podcast producer. Sunday morning cafe events are like mini retreats, featuring live music, a thoughtful, research-informed talk, guided discussions, and refreshments. If you'd like tickets for the next event or would like to donate to the mission, you'll find all the details in the show notes and at sundaymorningcafe.com.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, how are you? 30 shy 1%.
Unbroken, April 19th, 2026. Read by me, its author, Dr. Tom Wagner. So over the years, I've collected resilience stories. I hope to include them in a book I want to get around to publishing one of these days. So you're about to hear one of those stories. It comes from my interviews from about, 4 years ago with its subject, Larry. You're going to find out he is one resilient dude. This quality of resilience took root and it grew in an incredibly harsh terrain, which was the terrain of his childhood, where brutality and violence were just about a daily experience. In this article, you'll hear an account of what protects the human spirit from harm, and then next week I'll follow it up with another essay where I'll deal with what builds back a soul after it has been harmed. So be forewarned, it's impossible to tell a story like this one without including the brutal context that gave rise to it. So let me introduce you to Larry in the current time zone. So Larry's active in a large suburban Catholic church. If you met him there, you'd see that he's a man of few words, but he's got a ready smile. Chances are good that he'd be with his wife. They've been together 34 years. They're best friends. They love to go to the lake. They love to go on cruises together. These empty nesters helped each other raise his 2 boys that are in their 40s now, as well as her son and daughter. They're in their 30s. As of this writing, they're the collective grandparents of 10. And I'm going to quote him now. "My biggest plus is having Lizzie," he confided. Nothing about this man, or successful by every measure life, gives a shred of evidence of the poverty or the brutality that marked his childhood. So Larry was an electrician for 35 years. He's retired now. His gentle warmth will put you at ease, even when you're asking him questions that take him back to the most painful moments of his life. So, you might be thinking, why didn't Larry turn down my request for this piece that I'm writing and that I'm giving you right now? Why not let those sleeping dogs lay? Because this retired electrician isn't one to turn down a neighbor's request for help. If his story of survival and recovery could provide a handhold or a foothold to somebody else in a tough spot, he was on board for it. Through the course of our interviews, I kept checking in to make sure that his central nervous system wasn't re-experiencing the cruelty of his childhood. At each bend in the narrative road, he assured me that he was good to continue. It's his hope and my hope that you'll find in his story tools, techniques, and strategies to assist you in whatever brand of brutality and cruelty that life has given you or may one day present to you. You're going to find that Larry's life and the story that comes up out of that life is a powerful testimony to the natural resilience that is woven into the human spirit. Okay, so section 1, entitled South of Eden. That classic story in Genesis of being thrown out of paradise came to mind when I heard about his parents' terrible divorce settlement over 60 years ago. Family research was in its infancy when the judge dropped the gavel on Larry's childhood. The father of 2 boys, 3 and 4 years old respectively, that is, Larry's dad, would only be allowed to welcome them home once a month from 10 a.m. on Saturdays until 5 p.m. on Sundays. That was the framework that allowed the proverbial snake into the garden of Larry's childhood. That snake's name? Dick. It would take a very thick volume to contain all the episodes of cruelty that Dick visited upon his own wife, which was Larry's mom, her two boys, Greg, his older brother, was 5, and Larry, that was 4. And Dick visited that same kind of cruelty on his own 2 kids, his biological kids. There was Greg, who also lived at full-time with Greg and with Larry. In order to accurately map the terrain of Larry's childhood, I'll offer just a few of the significant landmarks of Dick's cruelty. From these stories will surface the profound elements of resilience that'll shine all the more for their contrast with the dark backdrop of cruelty and poverty. Next section's entitled First Blood. Even an average-sized man like Dick would have quadrupled the size of a 4-year-old boy. Despite this consideration, and maybe even because of it, the new boyfriend felt entitled to physically menace a toddler without any kind of compunction. Larry's first remembrance of Dick involved an incident where he was standing and playing in the back of his mom's convertible. Like usual, he was enjoying bouncing up and down while she went into the grocery store. Her new boyfriend in the passenger seat ordered him to sit. Unaccustomed to the snake that had made its way into his life, Larry behaved like a 4-year-old. He continued his bouncing and playing in the back. For the first of many episodes, Dick's high school ring struck Larry square on his 4-year-old skull, hard enough to knock him on his back. Larry remembered lying there, quote, staring up at the blue sky, unquote. Had he been a bird, he would have flown off into that blue freedom. As it stood, he'd remained tethered to a cruel cage with a striking snake until the balance of his boyhood was spent 13 years later. Next section, a typical Christmas story. Holiday stories that are chaotic and violent, they're common when we're talking about children of abusive alcoholic parents or step-parents. Larry remembers one particular Christmas that stood out among the others. Dick returned home from a Christmas Eve party drunk and enraged, and I'll quote him here. He went wacko, destroying every dish and every pan in the kitchen. Then he went after the Christmas tree and all the presents. As usual, on the morning after one of these tirades, it was like nothing happened. We woke up to the wreckage. The 4 of us always had to clean up after him. He never said he was sorry. He would never clean up after himself. Larry and his brothers stayed in a small room off the kitchen where the bulk of the Christmas Eve mayhem took place. Quote, we heard all of the commotion, Larry said, but we stayed quiet on the other side of the wall. Just like the survivors' reports in Japanese or German death camps, the inmates of this house tried to escape his notice at all times. Quote, he was always looking for a place to put his anger, Larry said. You just tried to not have him notice you. You didn't talk. You just sat there. Dr. Seuss's imagination wasn't nearly dark enough to create a Grinch quite like this Grinch. After he tore up all evidence of Christmas, quote, Mom tried to rewrap her presents with anything she could find around the house. That year, she had gotten my brothers and me walkie-talkies, end quote. In a scene that was as tender as it was crushingly sad, on Christmas morning, quote, she handed me an oatmeal box. I opened up that box and poured out the pieces of a broken walkie-talkie set. Next session. Indestructible. 2 resilience tool. First one, play. What came next in this story was a stout kind of grit. A grit that's the birthright of every mother's child. After they cleared the wreckage and salvaged Christmas gift pieces, Larry and his brothers went out to, check this out, play. They ended up, again, playing with those walkie-talkies. And here I'll quote him, like pretend, end quote. Abundant research from the field of play therapy has demonstrated that the healing power in play, especially for kids who've suffered physical or emotional trauma. For Larry and his brothers, who were constant targets of violence, play was an act of soul salvaging. It was an act of resistance in the face of injustice and cruelty. When I heard this story, I visualized their abused mom on that Christmas morning. She'd have been looking out the window in my mind. I'd think of her that way, looking out the window and catching reassuring glimpses of her son's innate superpower in action. I can just see her observing broken toys made whole again with magic, the magic of childhood imagination. I can see her at that window. I can picture her breathing in just enough hope for one more day. Outside on that Christmas, I'm imagining little boys creatively burning all those stress hormones. And I'm imagining, because I've done this too, I imagine them beaming themselves to imaginary places, or bad guys are put into their places, and kids get to be kids. So one thing Dick couldn't rip up or tear up was a boy's ability to engage in imaginative play. Another thing he couldn't get to, that he couldn't destroy, was the second tool I want to talk about, which was childhood companionship. There was a solace that Larry felt in the company of his three older brothers. Those boys yoked themselves together like a team of horses are yoked together, that let them share the weight of this heavy burden. And here I'll quote Larry again. Just them being there was comforting. Now, keep in mind, they're behind that wall for all this Christmas Eve mayhem. Again, I'll quote him. Just them being there was comforting. It was helpful because you were all going through the same thing. You knew what they were thinking and feeling. They knew what you were thinking and feeling. You didn't have to say anything, which is helpful because boys at that age are characteristically unable to really put into words feelings and thoughts like that. But to know that someone else were thinking and feeling the same thoughts gave a kind of comfort. At such a young age, these boys already knew something that widows and widowers discover in grief support groups. By the age of 10, they'd have known the truth that every AA member encounters when they have to confront what they call their baffling, cunning diseases. What is that truth? Just this: when two or three are gathered under the load of a shared suffering, something transcendent and stronger than destruction manifests. Dr. Peter Levine's convincing research has shown that the presence of a supported person, one supported person, in the midst of a traumatic event has the power to regulate the central nervous system, to tame down destructive stress hormones. The power of this one ingredient, that is companionship, has been shown to prevent the onset of post-traumatic stress disorder, even in hard-to-imagine situations like Larry's and his brother's situation. So in summary, play plus companionship equaled the resilience that Larry and his brothers experienced. Check out this weekend ritual of theirs. Quote, Saturdays were our days to go to the dump to see what we could find, end quote. Larry laughed as he recounted those mornings. Again, he was laughing in the current time zone as he thought back to those mornings he had on Saturdays. And I'll quote him here at length again. We'd always have some bike that we'd cobbled together, a 26-inch front tire, a 28-inch one in back, one pedal that wasn't even a pedal, was just a stub. We all had bikes. We were handy like that. During the summer, from sun up till sundown, we'd be out. We didn't want to come home until we absolutely had to. And the final section here, another takeaway from Larry's story. In his book, The Healing Path, James Finley describes his own childhood experience of ongoing brutality. Finley's path to wholeness wound through the terrain of a contemplative spirituality that showed up for him by the time he was 14. By way of contrast, it'd take years for Larry to formally and regularly make conscious contact with his own spiritual approach. Nonetheless, to my mind, Finley's theological lens is useful in considering Larry's childhood. Echoing ancient spiritual masters, Finley maintains that there is an unlimited, inborn sense of resilience at the core of our being. As a spiritually informed counselor, I'm intrigued by any process that assists people in recognizing and making contact with that core. It seems to me that Larry and his brothers made anonymous contact with that solid inner ground in their companionship and in their play with one another. For anyone who has suffered abuse, stories like Larry's provide an important antidote to a terrible lie that exists in our culture, namely that abuse survivors are damaged goods. Larry's story reveals just the opposite. One of the great privileges in my practice of psychotherapy is to work with people like Larry. In these instances, I actually get to play, kind of similar to the way that Larry and his brothers played at the dump. I get to look for treasures that are hiding in a past that was thought to be nothing more than an ugly junkyard. In locating a bright spot in that dark past, say like imaginative play or innate handiwork skills, I get to draw those elements into the foreground. My job is to help these clients see previously unseen strengths and capabilities. Little by little, a past that was thought to contain only humiliation can get reframed to highlight that which remains unbroken, stable, and strong. At this point in my article, I'll turn to some reflection questions. Now, if you don't want to stay here to get these verbally, you can just go right on over to my blog to see them written down, and that way you can maybe journal with those in a more slow process so you don't have to scribble these down. All right, but here we go. If you stay with me here, I'll just read them to you. First question. If you've ever suffered any kind of damage to your psyche, to your soul, what has helped you to counter that sense of yourself as damaged? Does that sense ever resurface? And if it does, what do you do with that? Second question. Have you ever had the experience of telling the story of a difficult time in your life and having your story listener reflect back strengths that they saw or see in you, even in the darkest of times? Third question. Can you think of a time when a supportive person made the difference in a hard time? Can you think of a time when you were the person who made all the difference for someone else in that hard time? Final question. What role has play performed in your life? Can you locate a couple stories of when imaginative play was essential for your well-being? What are the current contexts where your playfulness shines out of you?
Dr. Tom's producer, Logan, here again with a quick note. If you'd like tickets for the next Sunday Morning Cafe event or would like to donate to support the mission, you'll find all the details in the show notes and at sundaymorningcafe.com.